All right, everybody, buckle up because today we're going to really stretch our brains with some physics. But not just any physics. We're talking about how physics is like the foundation, the backbone of everything around us.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And to guide us on this journey, we've got a chapter from one of the greats, Richard Feynman, from his famous lectures on physics. And let me tell you, this one's a doozy. It's like he took all of science, put it under a microscope, and found physics hiding in every single cell.
You know what's so great about Feynman? He has this amazing way of revealing those hidden connections. We tend to put science in these neat little boxes, biology, chemistry, astronomy, but he just throws the boxes out the window.
Exactly. He just tosses them right out. And he jumps right in with chemistry, basically saying that theoretical chemistry, the stuff that explains why chemicals react the way they do well, it's basically physics in disguise.
It all comes down to those fundamental laws that govern how atoms and molecules behave, and more specifically, quantum mechanics. Think of those laws like a rule book, dictating how these tiny particles can interact. But now, don't get the wrong idea.
Like suddenly chemistry is a piece of cake if you can wrap your head around quantum mechanics.
If only it were that simple. Knowing the rules doesn't make you a master strategist, right?
Yeah.
But it's when we scale things up that it gets even more interesting. We're talking trillions upon trillions of atoms and molecules, all interacting at once during a chemical reaction.
So how do we even begin to make sense of all that chaos?
That's where statistical mechanics comes in. It uses physics to predict the behavior of these massive groups of particles, especially how they exchange heat and energy, all those interactions happening on a scale we can't even fathom.
Okay, so rather than trying to track every single atom, physics gives us the tools to zoom out and see the big picture. What does that look like in action?
Imagine trying to predict the weather. Could you imagine trying to model every single air molecule? It boggles the mind. But instead of getting lost in the weeds, we use statistical mechanics. We look at large-scale patterns, probabilities, and that's how we get those surprisingly accurate forecasts. It's all thanks to physics, bridging that gap between the microscopic world of atoms and the stuff we experience every day.
So that's how we design new materials and figure out how our climate's changing.
Wow. Okay, so physics is calling the shots in chemistry. Got it. But what about when we step into the realm of organic chemistry? You know, the chemistry of life itself. We're talking about the building blocks of us now. There's got to be some other force at play, right?
That was a big debate for a long time. People thought that stuff in living things, well, they thought it was somehow different. Like it couldn't be created from just regular inorganic matter.
Oh, like there is some kind of special sauce, a life force.
Exactly. But guess what? They were wrong. Turns out, even the most complex biological molecule, the stuff that makes up you and me, it all follows those same fundamental laws of physics.
So no magical life force after all. Nope, just plain old physics. And you know, it's funny because for a long time, people thought biology was all about dissecting frogs and memorizing the parts of a cell.
Which, let's be honest, can be a little dry.
No argument there.
Yeah.
But what most people don't realize is that biology has actually played a huge role in shaping our understanding of physics, too.
Wait, really? I always thought it was the other way around.
It's true. Think about one of the cornerstones of physics, energy conservation. You know, the idea that energy can't be created or destroyed, just transformed.
Yeah, I remember that from school. Pretty basic stuff.
Basic, but fundamental. And guess what? Early studies on that very principle, they actually came from scientists studying heat exchange in living organisms.
No way. So they were looking at how living things use energy, and that gave them insights into the laws of physics. Mind-blowing.
It was a huge deal. Challenged the prevailing view at the time, showing that living things weren't exempt from the laws of physics. It was a game changer.
I love that. Biology throwing physics a bone. Okay, but let's flip it back around. How does physics help us make sense of something as complex as, say, a muscle contracting?
Picture this. A line of dominoes all set up. You flick that first one, and boom.
Chain reaction.
Exactly. It's like a cascade. Nerve impulses, those electrical signals that zip through your body, they work in a very similar way.
Okay, I'm with you. So the dominoes are like electrical signals. Walk me through it.
So each domino represents ions, you know, those charged particles, moving across a nerve cell's membrane. This movement creates a teeny tiny change in electrical potential. And that change, it travels down the nerve fiber like a domino effect until it reaches its destination. And boom, you've got a signal transmitted at lightning speed.
So it's like a biological electrical circuit. And that's how our brains tell our bodies to do stuff. That's pretty efficient, I've got to say.
Evolution at its finest.
Okay, so we've got the signals, but what about the muscle actually contracting? Where does physics come in there?
Ah, well, that involves a very special molecule called ATP, which is like the energy currency of cells. Physics, along with its pal chemistry, helps us understand exactly how ATP stores and releases energy to power that whole muscle contraction process.
And to think all that's happening at a microscopic level every time we move a muscle, that's wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, I have to admit something. The precise nitty-gritty of muscle contraction, how all those molecules work together to actually generate force, that's something scientists are still actively researching.
Really? I figured they had that all figured out by now.
Nope. It's a testament to how incredibly complex even the tiniest processes in our bodies really are. And it reminds us that we definitely don't have all the answers. But
Right.
hey, that's what makes science so exciting, right?
Totally. Keeps us on our toes.
Yeah.
But speaking of intricate processes, how do we get from muscle contractions all the way back to the blueprint that makes it all possible? DNA. That's got to be a story for the books.
Oh, it absolutely is. DNA, with its elegant double helix structure,
Yeah.
that twisted ladder shape, it's like a microscopic library that holds the instruction manual for building and maintaining an entire organism.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it. This tiny molecule contains the code for everything about us. Every single cell in our body has this blueprint inside it. But how does that code actually get put into action? It's one thing to have the blueprints, it's another to actually build something.
That's what makes DNA so ingenious. The way those bases pair up within the DNA molecule, adenine with thymine and cytosine with guanine, that's nature's very own coding system. And get this specific pairing. It's what makes DNA replication possible. Like, picture each strand of the DNA ladder acting as a template, a blueprint for creating a brand new strand.
So it's like unzipping a zipper and having each side form a whole new complete zipper. Okay, that makes sense for how DNA copies itself. But how does it tell our bodies what to build? How do we go from this code to, say, creating those muscle proteins we were just talking about?
Ah, that's where RNA swoops in to save the day. Think of RNA as the dedicated messenger, personally escorting instructions from the DNA, which is hanging out in the cell's nucleus, to the ribosomes, those protein-making factories in the cell.
Okay, so we've got the blueprint, the messenger, and the factory. It's like a well-oiled machine.
A very well-oiled machine.
Right.
Billions of years of evolution got us here.
But even with all that, there are still some mysteries, right? I mean, the exact translation process, how that DNA code actually gets read and transformed into a very specific protein, that part's still a bit of a head-scratcher.
You're telling me. It's like we've got the blueprints to build a skyscraper, but we don't speak the architect's language. We're still figuring that part out.
Wow. Well, I'll be eagerly waiting for the day they crack that code. But for now, I think we need to shift gears a bit. Feynman doesn't stop at the building blocks of life. He goes completely cosmic on us.
And what a ride it is. From the depths of ourselves to the vastness of space. But the coolest part, he shows us how even those distant stars, those twinkling points of light, are connected to us through the laws of physics.
Okay, now you've got to give me the SparkNotes version of that. How in the world are we connected to stars?
Well, it all started with a pretty revolutionary discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Stars, as it turns out, are made of the same stuff we are. Atoms. And we figured this out using something called spectroscopy, a technique where scientists can actually analyze the light emitted by stars.
Hold on a second. We can figure out what stars are made of just by, what, looking at their light through a fancy telescope or something?
You got it. It's all about the light.
Tell me more. This is blowing my mind.
It's like cosmic fingerprinting. See, each element in the universe, when it's heated up, it emits a unique pattern of light, kind of like its own fingerprint. And by analyzing these patterns, these fingerprints, in starlight, scientists made an incredible discovery.
And that discovery was, don't leave me hanging.
The elements in stars, they're the same elements we find right here on Earth, just in different amounts. Isn't that wild?
You mean to tell me that our sun, that giant ball of fire in the sky, is made up of the same basic ingredients as me?
You, me, the Earth beneath our feet, even that cup of coffee you're holding, it all came from stardust.
Okay, that's just great. I need a minute to process that. We are stardust. Amazing. But how? How can a star be like a giant factory for making all the elements?
It's all thanks to an incredible process called nuclear fusion. Imagine this. Inside a star's core, the pressure and temperature are so mind-bogglingly intense that hydrogen atoms are basically forced to fuse together. And when they do that, they create helium. And that fusion, it releases an unbelievable amount of energy.
Well, that's what makes them shine. They're like giant nuclear-powered furnaces.
You got it. But it gets even cooler. They don't just make helium. As stars get older, they start to fuse heavier and heavier elements, all the way up to iron.
And then what?
Well, eventually, these massive stars, they can't hold themselves together any longer, and they explode in a spectacular supernova.
Talk about going out with a bang.
No kidding. And when that happens, all those elements that the star spent its life creating, they're scattered throughout the cosmos, seeding the universe, if you will, with the building blocks of planets and life itself.
So to recap, every element in the universe, every single ingredient that makes up everything we see and touch was forged in the heart of a star. This puts any science fiction movie to shame.
It really is incredible, isn't it? And it's a pretty powerful reminder that we're not separate from the cosmos. We are the cosmos.
I am stardust. Okay, I'm just going to keep repeating that to myself. But while I do, let's bring things back down to Earth for a bit. Feynman also talks about geology in this chapter, right? I mean, what does physics have to say about our very own planet?
Well, he kicks things off with something we can all relate to. Erosion. We
What?
see it everywhere, right? The power of wind, water, and time slowly but surely shaping our landscapes.
Right, rivers carving canyons, waves crashing against cliffs. Those are things we can see with our own eyes.
But here's the thing. For every bit of erosion, there's an equal and opposite force of creation. Mountains are being built up constantly, pushed skyward by some pretty powerful forces deep within the earth.
That's true. I mean, otherwise the Earth would just be one giant eroded plain by now, right?
Right.
But what are those mountain-building forces? Are they as easy to see as, say, a river slowly wearing down a rock over time?
I wish it were that simple. Things like volcanoes and earthquakes. Now, those are the true movers and shakers of our planet. They're the forces that really shape Earth's surface. And they're incredibly complex. We're still trying to fully understand them.
Really? You'd think we'd have a better grip on what's happening right beneath our feet.
Wouldn't you think? The funny thing is, in some ways, we actually understand the interior of stars better than we do our own planet's depths.
And now, how is that even possible?
It all comes down to, well, extreme conditions. We can use physics to model and predict how matter behaves under the immense pressure and heat found inside a star. Believe it or not, it's actually a bit easier than trying to map out the crazy swirling patterns of molten rock and shifting tectonic plates deep within the Earth.
Wow. So geology really throws us a curveball. Even with physics on our side, there are still mysteries buried deep within our own planet. But you know what's even more mind-boggling than the Earth's core?
Let me guess. The human mind.
Bingo. And guess what? Feynman dives headfirst into that too.
Oh, yes. The intersection of physics and psychology. Now, that is where things get really interesting. And, I'll be honest, a little controversial.
It really makes you think, like, where do we even draw the line between the physical and the mental?
It's a question that has philosophers and scientists, well, it has them going around in circles.
And it sounds like Feynman had something to say about it too. I remember you mentioned earlier that he was very specific about separating scientific psychology from psychoanalysis.
Oh, absolutely. He makes a very clear distinction there. And to be fair to Feynman, psychoanalysis often depends heavily on subjective interpretations, individual experiences.
Yeah.
And that can make it really tricky to pin down using the more, shall we say, concrete tools of physics.
Right, because you can't exactly measure someone's subconscious desires with a ruler. So when Feynman talks about psychology, he's really zeroing in on the physical stuff, the nuts and bolts of the brain as a system.
You got it. He's not dismissing the importance of emotions or anything, but he's approaching it from the angle that even the most complex thoughts, the things that make us us, they all ultimately come down to physical processes happening in the brain.
Okay, so we're talking neurons firing, synapses connecting, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's all about the physical mechanisms behind our mental processes.
Mm.
How does learning actually happen at the neuronal level? What's going on in the brain when we form a new memory?
Those are some seriously big questions. I mean, are we even close to having answers?
We're getting there, but the brain is a tricky beast. It's unbelievably complex. We're talking billions upon billions of neurons, all interconnected in a way that we're only just beginning to unravel.
It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape.
It's a pretty good analogy. Imagine trying to, I don't know, reverse engineer the entire internet just by looking at the electrical signals in a single computer chip.
Yeah, good luck with that. But what you're saying is it is possible that one day we might actually understand the brain, that whole inner universe, using physics.
It's a tall order, but never underestimate the power of science. The potential is there. Just imagine the insights we might gain into consciousness, creativity, even the very nature of reality itself. It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you realize how much we don't know. Speaking of which, I feel like we kind of glossed over geology earlier. And you know how Feynman was all about understanding something's history to really grasp it? What did he mean by that exactly?
He called it the historical question. And it's not just relevant to geology. It pops up everywhere in science.
Okay, so give me an example. How does the historical question apply to geology?
Well, take mountains, for instance.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just know how they're formed, plate tectonics and all that.
Right, the basics.
To truly understand a mountain, you have to ask, how did it get here? What were those forces at play over millions of years that sculpted its peaks, carved its valleys, shaped it into what we see today?
So it's like we need the whole backstory, the whole movie, not just a snapshot.
Exactly. It's the difference between looking at a single frame of a film versus watching the whole thing unfold.
Okay, I'm with you. Context is key. But what about physics itself? Doesn't it have its own historical question?
That's a really interesting point. Feynman actually argues that, at least back then, physics didn't really have a historical question in the same way that other sciences did.
Wait, really? You're telling me physicists don't care about the past?
Huh. Of course they do. But see, Feynman's point was that the fundamental laws of physics, at least as we understood them then, were considered to be, well, constant, unchanging.
They were the rules set in stone since the beginning of time.
Pretty much the bedrock of the universe. So physicists weren't exactly losing sleep over how those laws came to be, not in the same way that, say, a biologist might obsess over the origin of life, or a geologist might puzzle over the formation of the continents.
So physicists were pretty confident they had the universe figured out.
Let's just say they were happy with their unchanging laws. But, to be fair to Feynman, he acknowledged that our understanding of those laws could definitely change, evolve.
Of course. I mean, we're constantly making new discoveries. Who's to say those fundamental laws are as ironclad as we think they are?
Exactly. We might uncover new laws or find exceptions to the ones we thought were rock solid. And in those moments, well, then physics has a historical puzzle on its hands.
Then the game is on, and they have to figure out how the new rules fit into the old rules, how it all pieces together.
Precisely. But there's another key difference between physics and other sciences that Feynman points out.
Okay, now you got me intrigued. Lay it on me.
It has to do with how we, as humans, tend to compartmentalize things. Remember that glass of wine analogy we keep coming back to?
How could I forget? It's like the official beverage of our deep dive today.
Well, that glass of wine, it perfectly illustrates how we like to divide the world up into these neat little categories. But nature doesn't play by those rules.
You're saying the grapes don't stop and think, well, I'm a biological organism. I'll leave the photosynthesis to the physics department.
Exactly. And that's where physics really shines. It helps us to see beyond those arbitrary categories.
So we need to stop thinking in boxes.
Exactly. We need to think more like physicists. We need to look for those unifying principles, those underlying laws that connect things that seem completely unrelated.
To see the forest for the trees, as they say. But how do we actually do that? How do we train our brains to think like physicists?
It's about embracing both the elegance of those fundamental laws and the messy reality of the natural world.
That sounds like a tricky balancing act.
It can be. But that's where the real breakthroughs happen, when we can hold those two ideas in our minds at the same time. Take turbulent flow, for instance.
Turbulent flow. Now that rings a bell. Remind me again what that is.
Imagine trying to predict how fluids move, water, air, those sorts of things. When they're behaving themselves, it's not too bad. But when things get turbulent, hold on to your hat.
Think whitewater rapids, swirling tornadoes, stuff like that.
Exactly. Things get very unpredictable very quickly.
So what makes it so turbulent?
It's all about how the fluid's moving. We've got equations that can describe how fluids should move. But when things get turbulent, when you have all those eddies and swirls, well, those equations become incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to solve precisely.
So even something as basic as water flowing through a pipe can become a physics nightmare if it gets too chaotic.
You got it. And it's not just some theoretical problem either. We encounter turbulent flow all over the place. The swirling patterns of clouds, ocean currents, even the airflow over an airplane's wing.
Wow. It's everywhere. So this isn't just some esoteric physics problem. It has real-world applications.
Absolutely. Imagine being able to accurately predict the weather or design more efficient airplanes. Understanding turbulent flow could be a game changer. But cracking the code of turbulence? Well, it remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in classical physics.
So even with all our fancy equations and supercomputers, we're still no closer to figuring it out.
Not for lack of trying, but it just goes to show that nature always has a few tricks up its sleeve. Our intuition tends to break down when it comes to turbulent flow.
So we have to think outside the box. Or maybe just accept the chaos.
Sometimes. It's a good reminder that even in a field as fundamental as physics, there are still vast unknowns out there. Frontiers left to explore.
It's exciting, isn't it? It's like we're just scratching the surface of what there is to know about the universe.
Absolutely. And that's what makes science so endlessly fascinating. There's always a new discovery waiting around the corner, a new challenge to tackle, a new layer of complexity to unravel.
Speaking of unraveling complexity, I can't help but think about Feynman's analogy about the universe being contained in a glass of wine.
Ah, yes. That one never gets old.
What is it about that analogy that just captures the imagination?
It's so simple, yet so profound.
It really makes you stop and think. It really does. Feynman was onto something with that one.
It's like he's saying, yeah, we can analyze the wine down to its molecular makeup, get all technical with its tannins and whatnot.
Right, break it down into its individual parts.
But we can't lose sight of the bigger picture. That symphony of flavors, the way it makes you feel, those are all part of the experience too.
It's a whole sensory experience.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it all. I think that's what Feynman was getting at. The universe is a lot like that glass of wine, full of intricate details.
But also part of some grand, interconnected tapestry.
Exactly. It's all connected, and appreciating both the small stuff and the big picture.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes life interesting.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that actually reminds me of another point Feynman made that I found really charming. It was that story about the astronomer who had just figured out how stars get their energy.
Oh, you mean the one who was so excited about nuclear fusion that he just had to tell his date all about it while they were out stargazing?
That's the one. It's funny, right? But there's also this touch of melancholy to it for me.
You think so? Why is that?
I know, it's like this guy had just unlocked one of the biggest mysteries of the universe.
A truly awe-inspiring discovery.
Right, and his date just kind of chuckled and brushed it off.
Mhm.
I mean, I get it, not everyone's a physics nerd,
Sure enough.
but it makes you wonder, how many other groundbreaking ideas, incredible discoveries are out there just waiting to be found.
Or maybe even discoveries that have already been made but just haven't quite clicked yet, haven't found their audience.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Like, we're not quite ready to grasp them yet.
Like our brains haven't caught up to the universe yet.
Exactly. Or maybe we've even stumbled upon them already, but dismissed them as too crazy, too far out there.
It wouldn't be the first time. Think about how long it took for folks to accept that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Good point. Talk about a paradigm shift. It really makes you think twice about clinging too tightly to our current understanding of things.
Exactly. Keeps those brain cells firing, right?
It certainly does. Well, I think that's a pretty good note to end on. As we wrap up our deep dive into Feynman's world, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Physics, it's not just some abstract subject stuck in textbooks and labs. It's the thread that ties everything together.
The glue that holds the universe together, from the smallest atom to the most distant star, to that glass of wine we keep talking about.
It's all connected, and Feynman, he just had this way of making you see those connections.
He really did. And he reminds us to hold on to that sense of wonder, that childlike curiosity about the world.
Because the universe is a pretty amazing place, full of beauty, complexity, and endless possibilities. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, with a little curiosity, a little imagination, we can unlock some of its secrets. Thanks for joining us for this mind-bending deep dive, everyone.
Until next time.
Keep exploring.